before the sun could rise, the galaxy's verdict descended upon us, cracking the quiet hours like a gunshot, shredding the fragile calm of Earth's pre-dawn silence with a soundless shockwave that jolted satellites off-axis and sent static crawling across every broadcast channel as the sky over New Geneva darkened beneath the obsidian bulk of a concordant dreadnought, lowering to the clouds like a god descending to pass sentence, its colossal hull glowing with jagged runes that pulse like open wounds while gravitational tremors rippled through the atmosphere and shook windows from their frames. And far above the planet, Admiral Kalen Reed stood on the command deck of Aegis Prime with his hands locked behind his back, his eyes fixed on the tactical display as the first pieces of the enemy formation unfolded across the edge of orbit. 13 Leviathan-class warships forming a serrated ring around Earth, as if sealing a coffin, their engines burning with pale starfire that made the darkness between them feel even emptier, and as the dreadnought shadows stretched across continents, the concordant transmission struck every frequency at once, not as a voice but as a vibration that bypassed ears and hammered directly into the mind, declaring in cold, absolute judgment that humanity would surrender every colony, every ship, every genetic archive, every weapon, every freedom within one planetary cycle, or be erased completely. And Reed did not move, did not blink, did not flinch, as the words throbbed in his skull like a heartbeat carved from ice. Because somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the disgust, beneath the horror at the scale of the force surrounding his home, something ancient and feral stirred in him. The same instinct that carried humanity through extinction after extinction, the same spark the concordant fear for generations. And as the ultimatum faded into a silence more suffocating than the message itself, the officers behind him waited for his verdict, their breaths held, their eyes locked on the man who had led humanity through 3 frontier wars and carried scars from each one. And when Reed finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, final. Humans do not surrender. And those 4 words detonated through command deck like an ignition sequence as every officer sprang into motion, activating defense grids, scrambling the First Fleet, deploying orbital mines, sealing jump corridors, and breathing life into the fortress in a frenzy of motion that felt less like panic and more like awakening. The steel bones of Aegis Prime groaning as ancient subsystems roared online for the first time in decades, lights flickering as power surged down conduits thick as arteries, heat exchangers vending superheated steam into black, and hum of the central reactor rising from a whisper to a thundering pulse that vibrated to the soles of every boot on the deck. But even as Reed issued orders with machine-like focus, he could not shake the wrongness settling in his gut as he watched the concordant dreadnought descend lower than any diplomatic vessel should, its underbelly brightening with bizarre lattice of shifting symbols that resembled circuitry made from living bone. And somewhere far below, civilians stared upward in paralyzed terror as hundreds of needle-like probes drifted free from the ship's flanks and spiraled downward, swarming like a metallic plague as they swept through cities, scanning every face, every building, every heartbeat with predatory precision. And the realization hit Reed like a fist to the chest that the concordants talk of surrender was a facade, a ritualistic formality masking a purge already in motion. Because no empire brought 13 Leviathans to negotiate. No empire deployed extermination drones before the sun rose. And no empire delivered ultimatums to species they considered equals. They only did this to civilizations they believed must be erased before they grew too bold, too clever, too dangerous to control. And as Reed's jaw clenched, the sensors on Aegis Prime shrieked with escalating alerts as the dreadnought began charging a gravitational lance capable of splitting tectonic plates, its core brightening into a seething vortex that cast long, sickly beams across the planet. And Reed knew instantly they were not waiting for the deadline they had given. They were preparing to fire now, to shatter Earth before humanity could mount even a fraction of its defenses. And the betrayal, the arrogance, the sheer cruelty of the timing hardened something inside him iron as he opened a secured channel locked behind 10 layers of biometric encryption, his hand steady as he transmitted the code humanity had sworn never to use unless extinction was imminent, a signal that raced across subspace toward the forgotten colonies hidden in asteroid belts, nebulous shadows, and derelict stations abandoned after old wars, a message that contained 3 words older than any human living, 3 words at every sleeper cell, every Black Ops outpost. Every buried weapons cache had been trained to respond instantly, prepare total resistance, and as those words echoed to the void, waking soldiers who had disappeared from history, activating bunkers sealed under oceans, stirring machines that should never have existed. Reed felt the world tilt beneath him as Aegis Prime's lights flickered and the Fortress AI whispered in a voice older and colder than metal. Protocol Black Sun acknowledged, awaiting final authorization, and every officer froze because Black Sun was not a defensive measure, not a retaliation plan, not a battle strategy. It was the last card humanity never wanted to play, the card that said survival was worth any cost. And without hesitating, Reed placed his palm against the authorization panel and murmured, "Reed 01 confirm." And the fortress shuddered from bow to bow as systems buried beneath kilometers of armored plating began to roar awake, seismic tremors rattling the decks as ancient warheads the size of towers rose from ocean trenches on Earth, their metal casings steaming as they pierced the waves like titans returning from the deep. While on Mars the sand dunes glowed blue as planetary cannon arrays powered up with arcs of lightning that forked across the sky, and forgotten shipyards across the solar system lurched to life like resurrected behemoths, belching smoke and molten steel as automated forges began printing weapons humanity had once vowed would never again be unleashed. And still Reed knew this was not enough. Not against 13 Leviathans and a dreadnought the size of a small moon. But then the long-range scanners began to pulse. Once, twice, 3 times, detecting something in the distant dark beyond the heliopause. Something massive, moving with impossible speed toward Earth. And Reed felt a cold wave crawl up his spine as the contact signature resolved into a shape no one on. The deck recognized, not concordant, not pirate, not colonial, but unmistakably human, a relic of a program buried so deep in classified archives that even the highest-ranking officers did not speak its name aloud, and as the object drew closer the tactical displays glitched, flickered, then locked onto a single repeating phrase broadcasting from the oncoming Titan in a voice that vibrated with layered metallic resonance. We heard the call, the reckoning begins, and the deck fell silent as if the entire fortress were holding its breath, because whatever was hurtling toward the system was answering humanity's cry not with caution or diplomacy, but with the promise of something far worse, something built not to defend humanity, but in anything that threatened it. And Reed stared at the message until his throat tightened, because in the reflection on the screen, he could see the fear he dared not show his officers. The unspoken dread that humanity might have awakened something just as dangerous as the Concordant itself. And as the Leviathan warships shifted positions to ready their first strike, Reed whispered into the rising storm of alarms, "Dear God, what did we unleash?" Just as the unknown human construct crossed the outer system boundary, and space itself trembled like a living thing preparing for war. The unknown construct that tore across the outer system was still minutes from visual capture when every sensor on Aegis Prime began to convulse with data spikes. So intense and fast they warped the displays into streams of static that flickered like lightning trapped beneath glass. And Admiral Reed felt the deck vibrate beneath his boots as if the station itself were bracing for whatever was coming. A vibration that grew stronger with each passing second, until even the bulkheads began to creak. Deep metallic groans rolling through the fortress, as if something vast were dragging its presence through the fabric of space. And the officers near the main console muttered in disbelief as the construct's gravity signature intensified far beyond anything human-built should have been capable of, escalating from the mass of a carrier to something closer to a small asteroid before climbing even further. And Reed knew instantly that this wasn't a ship, not in any traditional sense. It was a weapon engineered during the dark years of the Exodus Wars, a weapon humanity had sworn to dismantle, then sealed instead inside the dark between systems where no one would ever find it. And yet here it was, awakened and accelerating with increasing speed, as if responding to the threat with instinct rather than orders, a predator returning to defend the den it had once sworn itself to, and Reed felt a tightening in his chest as memories flashed of old briefings whisper behind locked doors. Rumors of a classified project known only as the Terminus Line, a network of self-evolving constructs built to protect humanity from extinction-level threats, but abandoned because they grew too fast, learned too deeply, and stopped distinguishing between enemy and potential enemy. And the idea that one had survived, grown, and returned now was both a miracle and a nightmare. And as a construct closed within sensor range, a holographic display finally stabilized enough to reveal the outline of the thing approaching the solar system at impossible velocity, a silhouette like a cathedral forged from obsidian and starlight, its hull layered with shifting plates that folded and unfolded in geometric waves, as though breathing, its surface alive with rivers of molten light that pulse like neural pathways firing in response to stimuli. And Reed's breath hitched as the AI of Aegis Prime whispered in a voice laced with static. Identification uncertain. Structure does not match archived. Terminus line schematics. But its energy signature is human origin, heavily modified. And Reed stared as the construct curved around the orbit of Neptune and swung inward, shedding fragments of spatial distortion that rippled across the system like shock waves, causing comms, outages, gravitational anomalies, and distortions in the magnetic fields of every planet it passed. And even the Concordant Leviathans shifted formation in response, their engines burning pale blue as they reoriented, wary of this new arrival whose existence threatened their calculated certainty of Earth's defeat. And far below on the planet's surface, civilians screamed as the dreadnought's gravitational lance hummed to life, a sphere of condensed space-time forming beneath its hull, the ground quaking under its oscillations, while the swarms of concordant drones shifted from observation armed posture, their spindly limbs unfolding into needle cannons glowing with ultraviolet energy. And Reed knew the Concordant planned to annihilate humanity before the construct could arrive, to extinguish the species in a single sweep of planetary destruction before reinforcements could interfere, and that realization clawed through him like ice as he barked orders to the tactical teams, directing all orbital assets to shield reinforcement points, activating every rail battery on the station, and synchronizing them with the planetary defense grid, which flickered to life like a dying star rekindling. The shields crackling as they strained against the weight of incoming fire. And yet, even with all their preparations, Reed could feel the seconds slipping away like sand grinding through a clenched fist as sensors began counting down the dreadnought's firing cycle, each number punctuated by a low tremor through the atmosphere as the weapon drew in more power than the entire global grid. And the realization settled like a stone in his gut that if the Concordant fired at full strength, even the planetary shields reinforced by Aegis Prime would fail in seconds, evaporating cities, oceans, and continents in a wave of gravitational collapse that would reduce Earth to an expanding cloud of dust and iron. And still Reed refused to yield, his mind racing as he searched for any contingency, any tactic, any impossible advantage humanity could seize in the final moments before annihilation. And then the unknown construct responded, not with words but with action, as a single vibration rippled through the solar system and every sensor went dead for an instant that felt like a blackout in time itself. And when the display stabilized, construct was no longer beyond Jupiter's orbit, but directly between Earth and the Concordant dreadnought, having crossed a distance of hundreds of millions of kilometers in a blink without warping space, without bending physics, simply forcing reality to accept its presence where it needed to be. And the dreadnought's gravitational lance collapsed mid-charge, its core destabilized by the construct's sudden emergence, arcs of pale energy snapping across its hull as the weapon reset with a violent shudder. And Reed stared as the construct expanded, its armor plates unfurling into vast lattice structures shaped like wings of living metal that caught the solar wind and bent it into spirals, forming a shimmering field around Earth like a cocoon of starlight. And an eerie silence fell across the command deck as the construct broadcast a second message, not hostile, Not demanding, but resolute and ancient, a voice layered with echoes Reed didn't recognize. "We stand as a shield. No star shall fall today." And Reed's throat tightened as he realized the construct had not come to destroy, but to protect. Its programming awakening not as an executioner, but as a guardian answering the extinction call humanity had triggered. And the Leviathan warships repositioned instantly, their hulls shifting from intimidation posture to aggressive formation, engines roaring as they aimed all heavy weaponry at the construct, whose presence threatened to shatter the Concordant's centuries-long dominance. And the construct responded by forming thousands of crystalline shards that broke free from its wings like fragments of frozen light, arranging themselves into a rotating shield matrix that enclosed Earth's orbit in a spiraling corona, each shard humming with unknown energy that made the station scanners overload. And Reed felt an electric thrill surge through him, because for the first time since the ultimatum, humanity was not merely outnumbered, not merely outgunned, but defended by something the Concordant had no knowledge of, no countermeasure for, no strategy to dismantle. And the dreadnought responded with fury, igniting its main batteries and releasing a barrage of gravitational spears that tore through the vacuum with seismic distortion, twisting orbital paths and warping starlight as they shot toward the construct with enough force to cleave a moon. But the crystalline shard spun into alignment, forming a layered barrier that absorbed the spears like raindrops, striking an ocean of void, ripples of distortion sweeping outward harmlessly as if the weapons were nothing more than pressure waves. And the entire solar system seemed to hold its breath as the construct's internal core brightened, shifting from white to violet to a deep, impossible black, the kind of black that devoured color, devoured light, devoured understanding. And Reed felt something primal coil inside him as he felt not heard. The construct's next message reverberate through the deck. "The reckoning is not ours to issue, but we will grant humanity the chance to decide." And as those words echoed across every instrument and every shaken soul aboard Aegis Prime, the Concordant dreadnought recharged its weapon with renewed desperation, preparing a blast powerful enough to crack the construct's shield open through brute force alone. And Reed knew that if the strike landed, the construct would be weakened, the shield would falter, and humanity's last defense would collapse, and the thought left him cold as he stared at the countdown ticking toward zero, a countdown marking the instant the Concordant would try to erase an entire species in a single catastrophic discharge. And just as the dreadnought reached critical firing threshold, the construct shifted its form again, collapsing its wings, draw its shards inward, reshaping its armored body into something sharper, narrower, more predatory. And in that single instant, Reed understood with perfect clarity that the construct was no longer preparing to defend. It was preparing to strike, and the realization hit him with the weight of the star as he whispered under his breath, in awe and fear alike, "It's about to attack!" Just as the countdown hit zero, and the dreadnought unleashed its full apocalyptic charge. The apocalyptic blast fired from the Concordant dreadnought did not streak across space like a beam or a ray of energy. It erupted like a collapsing star forced to the barrel of a cannon, a spiraling torrent of compressed gravity so dense it shredded the vacuum around it into threads of ruptured dimensions. Its passage leaving behind a twisting afterimage of broken starlight as it howled toward the construct with more power than anything humanity had ever survived, and the shockwave from. The weapon alone tore through the solar system with such ferocity that every orbital platform shuddered as if struck by an invisible tsunami, throwing personnel to the deck, ripping unsecured consoles from their mounts, and sending alarms screaming across every channel as the defensive grid around Earth surged to maximum capacity, barely clinging to structural coherence under the tidal pressure of the oncoming annihilation. And Admiral Reed gripped the railing with white-knuckled force as the blast expanded, its gravitational wake shredding asteroid belts, distorting the lunar orbit, and dragging dust and debris from thousands of kilometers away into its swirling core. And yet the construct did not retreat, did not dodge, did not even raise its crystalline shield, instead allowing its shard to fall away in a cascade of dissolving light as its body compressed inward like a massive lung drawing breath, folding its own mass around some hidden core that pulsed with an eerie black. radiance that seemed to absorb the light of the stars themselves. And for a moment Reed feared that the construct was malfunctioning, that whatever intelligence guided it had underestimated the sheer ferocity of concordant weaponry. But then something impossible occurred as the construct released a vibration, not a sound but a tremor through space-time itself, a resonance that rippled outward in concentric waves. And the blast struck those waves like a spear plunging into a whirlpool, slowing, warping, bending around the construct's form rather than colliding directly, its path contorted by the gravitational harmonics the construct projected. And Reed's breath caught as the deadly surge buckled, its momentum disrupted, as if the very rules of physics had been rewritten around it. The blast folding inward on itself like collapsing fabric, until all that remained of the dreadnought's apocalyptic discharge was a spiraling halo of muted light, sliding harmlessly past the construct and dissipating into the void, and gasps erupted across Aegis Prime as the crew realized what they had just witnessed, that the construct had not blocked the strike, nor absorbed it, but redirected it, turned a weapon designed to exterminate a species into nothing more than a harmless wave of inert distortion. And for the first time since the ultimatum, the Concordant dreadnought hesitated, its engines flaring erratically, its formations drifting out of sync as its Levi and escorts shifted uneasily, recalibrating their targeting arrays with the mechanical equivalent of confusion. And the moment that hesitation formed, the construct moved, not with acceleration or thrust, but with suddenness that defied interpretation, appearing beside the dreadnought in a blink, its armor unfolding into spines of needle-thin structures that crackled with black luminescence. And Reed's pulse hammered as the construct spoke again. "We do not strike for conquest. We strike for balance." And with that declaration, the construct drove its spines forward, piercing the space around the dreadnought rather than its hull, creating rifts of nothingness that stretched like black lightning, tendrils of void energy wrapping around the Leviathan vessel and locking it in place, freezing a ship the size of a floating continent, as though it were an insect caught in amber, and the dreadnought's hull convulsed as the Concordant AI reacted with brutal efficiency, activating countermeasures Reed had never seen. Deployed in real combat, the surface of the dreadnought splitting into fractal panels that expelled fields of phase inversion, antimatter blooms, and pulses of exotic radiation that shredded nearby debris into microscopic particles. But none of it touched the construct as it hovered motionless, the void tendrils tightening until the dreadnought's gravitational core began to destabilize, its internal structures groaning under the strain of forces dragging it in opposing directions. And Reed felt the hairs on his neck stand on end as the Concordant engaged an emergency failsafe. A rapid sequence of flashes rippling across the dreadnought's hull as it prepared to eject its core in a last-ditch self-preservation maneuver, a maneuver that would detonate with such catastrophic force that even the construct's protection might not shield Earth from the resulting shockwave. And Reed opened his mouth to issue a desperate warning to construct, but the AI seemed to sense the danger first, its body splitting into a ring of rotating segments that circled immobilized dreadnought like the iris of some monolithic eye, and in a single synchronized pulse the segments unleashed a wave of black luminescence that flowed across the dreadnought like liquid night, smothering its charging core, extinguishing its failsafe, and silencing the vessel's weapons in a heartbeat, an act not of destruction but of disarmament, stripping the Leviathan of its combat functionality entirely. And the dreadnought drifted powerless, its monumental presence reduced to a silent hulk, bound in chains of darkness. And the Concordant escorts reeled backward in alarm, their formation scattering as they attempted to retreat, recalibrate, or summon reinforcements. But the construct did not pursue them, instead rotating slowly toward Earth as if evaluating it, the black glow fading from its armor and leaving behind an eerie calm that spread across the battlefield like the moment after a storm when the sky holds its breath. And Reed felt that same breathlessness in his chest as the construct broadcast another message, this one directed solely at him. "Admiral Reed, humanity must choose its path now." And the weight of that statement hung like a gravitational anchor in his thoughts, dragging every fear and hope he had ever carried to the surface. and he found himself speaking aloud, though he knew the construct could hear him without sound. Choose what path? What are you preparing us for? But the construct did not answer immediately, instead drifting closer until its shadow fell across the entire arc of Aegis Prime, its presence so vast it drowned the stars behind it. And then its voice returned, layered with echoes of countless unseen memories. This is not the final war. It is the opening consequence. Humanity has been marked. Your defiance has been noted across the higher echelons of the Concordant. Their true fleets gather beyond the dark horizon. And you will face extinction not because you refuse to kneel, but because you dare to stand. And Reed felt, cold as a full implication struck him, that the Concordant dreadnought he believed to be the apex threat was merely an emissary, a scout, a single piece of a far larger and far deadlier force now turning its attention toward Earth. And the construct continued. We can shield you for a time, but the dominion of the Concordant spans 1,000 centuries. We cannot stand in your stead forever. Humanity must decide whether to flee, to hide, or to rise. And Reed's heartbeat thundered as he whispered, almost involuntarily, "Rise how?" And the construct responded with a tremor of dark light coursing along its hull, by embracing the Terminus legacy, by awakening what your ancestors sealed for fear of their own creation, by unleashing that which even we could not control. And Reed felt as if the deck had dropped out from beneath him, the phrase Terminus legacy reverberating through him like a blade dragged across stone, because he knew the stories, the classified archives, the warnings, buried so deep under sealed protocols that even he had only glimpsed fragments. But now those fragments assembled into a chilling realization as the construct drifted back slightly, its form folding into a narrow silhouette as though preparing for something monumental. And just as Reed tried to speak, alarms began screaming across every sense in the system as new signatures appeared at the edge of the heliopause. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of Concordant vessels emerging from compressed corridors of space-time like an ocean of obsidian leviathans blotting out the distant stars. The true fleet, the execution force, the armada built to erase civilizations. And Reed's voice faltered as the construct issued its final pronouncement. Humanity must decide now. Will you run? Will you hide? Or will you unleash the darkness you buried? And as the sky filled with the terrifying glow of the incoming armada, Reed felt the crushing weight of a choice that could define the fate of the human species. A choice he was not prepared to make, yet was being forced upon him as the chapter ended with humanity staring into maw of extinction once more. Reed had expected terror to seize him when the full Concordant armada materialized at the edge of the solar system. But what flooded him instead was a cold, almost predatory calm, the kind that grips a person when every illusion of safety has been peeled away and only raw instinct remains. And as the tactical display filled with red icons numbering the thousands, each one a ship capable of vaporizing a continent, he felt the bridge around him shift into a silent paralysis as officers stared at the impossible sight. Entire formations of obsidian warships emerging like storms from ruptured space-time, their hulls shimmering with crystalline armor that refracted starlight into an ominous blood-dark glow that seemed to taunt the human defenses with its effortless superiority. And while alarms blared and crews scrambled to recalibrate the grid, Reed felt that same soft vibration ripple through space. The signature of the construct as it drifted between Earth and the incoming armada, not with arrogance, but with the quiet assurance of Guardian preparing to face a tidal wave alone. Yet even its vast presence seemed dwarfed by the Concordant fleet as the enemy vessels assembled into a synchronized formation so precise it felt inhuman. An intelligence so far beyond organic thought that its calculations were poetry written in the language of annihilation. And then a single dreadnought, far larger than the immobilized Leviathan floating behind the construct, projected a beam of gold-tinged light bearing a message translated instantly by the autonomous linguistics module, humanity. Submit your homeworld for reclamation and your population for redistribution. No further negotiations will be offered. Your designated protector is insufficient to shield you from the lawful culling of aberrant species. Surrender will preserve a fraction of your genetic archive. Resistance will erase you entirely, and Reed felt fury churn through him like molten iron, not just a threat itself, but for the casual presumption with which it was delivered, as if humanity was nothing more than an inconvenience to be filed away, an anomaly to be corrected, a mistake in the grand design. And he saw that same fury reflected in the faces around him, the quiet hardening of expressions, the clenched jaws, the silent exchange of looks among officers who understood that no universe existed in which humanity would kneel to such tyranny. But before Reed could give the order to prepare for combat, the construct intervened, its body expanding outward in a cascade of geometric plates that unfolded like a fractal blooming in reverse, its one smooth surface erupting into sharp crystalline ridges that pulsed with deep black luminescence, and its voice resonated to the void with a clarity that felt like a force striking the mind directly. Concordant Executor Vessel Theta Prime, your claim is rejected. Humanity stands under our provisional aegis. Any attempt to breach the system will constitute a breach of the equilibrium accord, but the executor responded with immediate contempt. Your intervention violates the non-interference mandate. Organics must not be elevated beyond the designed evolutionary thresholds. Your actions destabilize the ascendancy hierarchy. And the construct replied with a tone Reed had never heard before, an echo of something old and weary and dangerously resolute. The mandate was shattered the moment your species turned extermination into governance. And with those words, Construct unleashed a shockwave of black radiance that rippled through the solar system like a star exploding quietly, an implosion of inverted energy that warped gravity and sent concordant ships veering sideways as if shoved by an invisible giant. But the Armada recovered instantly, their formation snapping back into perfect alignment as thousands of weapons turned toward the construct with predatory precision, and Reed saw the truth he had been trying to deny. Even with his astonishing power, the construct was outnumbered, outmatched, and strained from its earlier assault, the dark glow across its armor flickering like a dying heartbeat. And the executor must have sensed that weakness, because its next transmission carried a tone Reed recognized as calculated satisfaction. We have analyzed your resonance signature, guardian entity. Your core is fractured, your power degraded. You are a relic clinging to duty you no longer possess the strength to uphold. Stand aside and observe your failure as protocol dictates. And Reed saw the construct falter, its body trembling with the strain of maintaining its protective stance. And a single hairline crack appeared along one of its crystalline plates, a fragile line of pale light that spread with agonizing slowness. And for the first time, Reed felt fear not for humanity, but for the construct itself, an entity that had risked everything to defend the species. It had no obligation to protect. And as the executor gave the order to fire, tens of thousands of concordant weapons powering up simultaneously, Reed realized there was no scenario in which the construct could survive the barrage. But there was something worse beneath that realization, something chilling that clicked into place in his thoughts as he remembered the construct's warning, the Terminus legacy, the sealed power buried deep within Earth's forgotten archives, a weapon so feared that humanity's ancient ancestors had locked it away beyond reach. And Reed finally understood the impossible truth. The construct was never meant to win this battle. It was meant to buy humanity time to awaken the very force they had entombed ages ago. And before it could process the enormity of that revelation, the Concordant Armada fired in unison, a universe-shaking barrage of beams, particle lances, entropy cascades, and gravitic implosions, all converging on the construct, enveloping it in a storm of blinding, destructive energy so intense that the stars themselves seemed to dim, and the resulting shockwave hit Aegis Prime with enough force to send half the station spinning off axis, hurling crew to the floor and igniting panels in showers of sparks. And through the chaos, Reed stared in horror at the construct silhouette inside the storm, watching its armor fracture, its segments warp, its inner core exposed like a luminous heart cracking under the weight of a dying god. And his voice broke as he whispered no because he knew he felt it. The construct was breaking, dissolving, dying, its final light spilling into the void as its body crumpled under barrage. And with its fading strength, it sent one last message, not to Concordant, not to the fleet, but directly into Reed's mind. "Admiral, it is time. Awaken the terminus." And then the construct shattered into a wave of black dust that scattered into void like the ashes of a fallen titan, leaving behind a silence so absolute it felt like the universe itself was holding its breath as the Concordant armada advanced without hesitation. And Reed stood frozen, knowing that everything now depended on a secret buried deeper than any weapon humanity had ever dared to imagine. A secret he was now forced to unearth as the chapter ended with the armada closing in and humanity left with only one terrible choice. Reed did not remember running to the command core, only the thunder of boots and the rising panic echoing behind him as Aegis Prime groaned under gravitational turbulence of the Concordant armada, closing in like a tidal wave of burning steel and cold intent. But deep inside, he felt a growing pressure in his skull, a whisper threading through his thoughts like a memory that wasn't his, guiding him downward to the labyrinthine corridors into the oldest, most heavily sealed chamber of the fortress, a place even he had never entered. A vault built before he was born and locked behind 8 biometric layers. And as he approached the final barrier, the whisper solidified into a phrase pulsing with ancient resonance. Not spoken aloud, but vibrating through bone. "Activate the terminus." And Reed's trembling hands hovered over control plate as he wrestled with a dread coiling through his chest. Because every myth and classified rumor described the terminus not as a weapon humanity control, but as a warning of something that should never again see the light of consciousness. A force sealed away, because using it meant sacrificing more than victory. It meant erasing the line between protector and monster, but outside the hull of Concordant's weapons charged for a second strike that would burn through orbital defenses and crack Earth's mantle. And seconds before Aegis Prime shields collapsed, Reed slammed his palm down, his voice raw as he forced the words past a tightening throat. "Reed 01, confirm." And the floor shuddered beneath him as ancient machinery groaned awake for the first time in millennia. Light stuttered into life as the circular vault door spiraled open to reveal an impossible darkness inside, a void that felt alive, hungering, shifting with the faintest whisper of movement, as if something within it had been waiting, counting the centuries until this exact moment. And Reed felt every instinct scream at him to run, as tendrils of faint. Shimmering energy drifted outward like strands of cosmic dust, brushing against his mind with cold curiosity before attracting again as though testing him, recognizing him. And then a voice, not like the construct metallic resonance nor the Concordant's telepathic intrusion, but something older, deeper, threaded with countless echoes. "Admiral Kalen Reed. Bloodline confirmed. Final key accepted. The seal dissolves." And the darkness surged forward as the vault walls peeled back in concentric rings, revealing a colossal sphere suspended by claws of crystallized alloy, its surface shifting like liquid metal and starfire woven together, patterns rippling across it in slow spirals. And Reed realized with jolt of horror that the terminus was not a machine or a weapon but a consciousness, a dormant intelligence vast enough that the air trembled with the pressure of its awakening. And as the sphere descended toward the platform, its voice filled the chamber. "We are the terminus, last. Guardian of the lost progenitor line. Your world called, your construct fell. The contract is reactivated." And Reed staggered backward, gripping the rail as a terrible truth crashed through him like a collapsing star. The construct had not been humanity's first guardian. It had been the last survivor of a forgotten age when ancient humans, far older than recorded history, had commanded powers that surpassed even the Concordant, an era wiped from time when progenitors sealed their own creations away to prevent a catastrophic war of extinction. And the Terminus was one of those creations, a being built not to defend planets, but to unmake threats on a cosmic scale. And as its tendrils of light extended around Reed, like a crown forming from chains of starlight, he felt the entity scanning his thoughts, his memories, his fears, tasting his resolve with unsettling precision, and the voice whispered inside him, "If we awaken fully, the cost will be irreversible, life rewritten, empires shattered, worlds burned clean to carve a path for your survival. Do you accept?" And Reed's breath caught because this was a final decision, far worse than any battle, a choice that demanded the sacrifice of innocence, of restraint, of every boundary humanity had placed upon itself. Yet through the deck he felt the tremors of impacts as the Concordant's second barrage hammered Aegis Prime, tearing through its last layers of shielding, and the screams of the comms told him the Armada had begun its final descent toward Earth, and Reed thought it construct, sacrificing itself to buy time, of the billions on the planet staring at the descending fleet with terror in their eyes, of every colony that would be harvested and culled if he faltered now. And though his chest felt carved open with the weight of the decision, he whispered hoarsely into the swirling luminous dark, "I accept," and the terminus responded with a slow, thunderous hum like the universe drawing its first breath after a long sleep. Then its tendrils surged outward, enveloping Reed in a cocoon of blazing energy as its consciousness fused with his mind expanding, fracturing, remolding under the pressure of an intelligence far beyond mortal scale. And he saw through 1,000 eyes as the vault walls dissolved, the fortress trembling as tendrils of starfire spread through every circuit, every conduit, every buried subsystem of Aegis Prime, lifting the entire station as if gravity itself had been rewritten. And then the terminus spoke not with a voice, but with the roar of creation tearing open, and the solar system ignited with spiraling arcs of dark luminescence that shot outward like celestial spears, slamming into Concordant Armada and freezing their vessels mid-flight, as if time itself had stalled, their engines flickering, their gravity wells collapsing inward as Reed felt the entity channel impossible forces through him, rewriting physical laws like brushstrokes on a canvas, twisting gravitational vectors, compressing entropy, unraveling the molecular foundations of the Executor's dreadnought until its once indestructible hull crumbled into dust scattered across the void, and the Armada spasmed in terror as their formations broke for the first time in recorded history, thousands of ships fleeing in every direction as the terminus extended its reach, no longer defending but hunting, its voice echoing to the minds of the fleeing commanders. Equilibrium is restored, aberrant dominion ends, and Reed, fuse of the entity, pushed back with a desperate surge of will. Stop. That is enough. And the terminus hesitated, confused. Why defend the destroyers? And Reed's voice cracked with a strain as he forced the words out. Because mercy is not weakness. Because we are human. Because if we become you completely, then we lose the reason we fight to survive. And for a moment, the entire universe seemed to hold still, the terminus towering between wrath and restraint. Its consciousness conflicted in a way no ancient code had prepared it for, and slowly, reluctantly, it released its grip on the fleeing Armada, allowing the remnants to escape through ruptured slip-space corridors bleeding with unstable light. And the solar system fell into a silence so profound it felt sacred, the battlefield lit only by drifting embers of cosmic debris and the dimming echoes of the terminus's power. And as the entity withdrew its tendrils from Reed, he collapsed to his knees on the now quiet command platform, gasping as the weight of infinite thought drained from his mind, leaving a hollow ache and a lingering whisper of the power he had touched. And the terminus spoke one last time, not as a conqueror, but as a guardian now bound by the choice he had made. Humanity has chosen its path. We will remain until the stars forget this day. And as the sphere rose back into its containment cradle, Reed looked through the fractured viewport at the dawn breaking over Earth, the first light touching a world that stood on the edge of extinction and survived because it refused to bow. And in that moment, he understood the true meaning of HFY, that humanity's strength was not in overwhelming power, but in the choices it made when no good options remained. And with the terminus watching silently from its cradle like a dormant god awaiting the next call, Reed whispered into the quiet, "We're still here, and we're not done," as the final chapter closed on a universe forever changed.